Now, let's spend some time in trying to understand the oligopoly market structure. We know that out of the four market structures, the monopoly, the oligopoly, the monopolistic competition, and the perfect competition space, oligopoly has some distinct characteristics. Now, just trying to understand what differentiates this oligopoly from the various other market structures. Just like a monopoly, this has so many barriers to entry. First of all, we know that there are very few number of players in any oligopolistic market, right? Very few notable players. Probably you can talk about an airline industry, or you could talk about a soft drink industry. You can think of various industries where there are very few players, or probably you think of some kind of consumer durables kind of industries where there are a very few branded players, very few big players, and probably a few local players that are operating. But traditionally, in those kind of businesses, any financial services providers, traditionally in those kind of businesses, you see that the barriers to entry are very, very high. Any new firm, there could be a barrier created because of the licensing restrictions from the government, or the initial costs of setting up of the business could be much, much higher, that not many people want to enter into those businesses, or the level of expertise and experience that is required to set up those kind of businesses is very high. Not many people may be interested to enter into those kind of businesses. But yeah, how much barriers are there, what is the extent of the barriers, they differ between the different kinds of industries. So probably you can visualize something like a soft drink industry or an airline industry, which you can do a comparison much better. And one interesting key feature that exists with those kind of businesses is they are not independent. Even if there are 10 players that are there, even if there are 10 different top players that are there in that business, we see that they are completely interdependent. Means any action, any decision, either regarding the price or advertising or anything that is being taken up by one of them, it is going to affect its rivals and they are going to react to it. Look at the typical commercial advertisements that you get on the television. Those companies which are advertising heavily, I see that they operate only in the oligopolistic market. Think of general advertisement that you get from telecommunications providers, probably like between Airtel, Idea, a few other mobile phone networks in India, or look at the advertisements provided by Pepsi and Coca-Cola in terms of the kinds of ads that they give, or any bike manufacturing companies, the advertisements that they give. All these kind of businesses, traditionally I treat them under the oligopolistic itself, because what you generally see is if one of them has initiated one decision, you could see that the rivals also will to follow the suit to a large extent. So it's a kind of a business where one company's action can affect the others, and the rival's action is affecting this particular firm also. But overall, because of this kind of a competition, the overall customer may get benefited because they have to, as a part of their competition, they may cut down the prices, which can benefit the consumers altogether. But of course, all these are oligopolistic industries itself. But again, depending on the number of firms that are operating in that industry, the behavior of the firms will differ. and the market practices within each of these oligopolistic businesses can be different. But in general, we see very few number of firms. There is a lot of product differentiation that is done. They try to differentiate their product from that of competitors. They advertise very heavily that differentiating feature. They try to make sure that it is getting registered in the minds of the customers. They create different choice for the customers. So here, rather than a price related competition, we see they focus heavily on non-price related competition. They do heavy marketing. They spend heavily on creating a brand loyalty. They get into excessive advertising. In some cases, all these are expenses which are again packaged into the price of the customer. Right? The more and more you are spending on marketing, the more and more you are spending on creating a brand loyalty, the more and more you are spending on advertising. That extra expense of the company should go into the price and be charged from the customer. So if the competition and if the advertising is to a limited extent, fair enough. In some cases, it can create some kind of false luring of the customer also, which is what will not be beneficial to the customer. If there is a possibility that the buyers can prevent the prices from being pushed up, which is what we call as the countervailing power, then the buyers are very much benefited through this kind of a mechanism. And there is a very heavy possibility of creating a supernormal profit, and they can very well redirect their supernormal profit towards the research and development activity, which can create lots of innovative products, which can create lots of efficiency, both production efficiency as well as allocation efficiency, and try to maximize their profits in the long run as well. And that is what will work out with the oligopolistic kind of a structure. But just to understand again on the broader aspect, there are three major forms of oligopoly that we see. One, the duopoly, where there are just two firms, probably Pepsi and Coke. Though there are many other players, the market share by these two is the significant. So there are a few markets which are just two firms operating, which are like duopolies. Then we see a structure which is a collusive oligopoly, probably something which is not good for the customers. Collusive, they come together either formally or informally. They have some kind of internal agreement between them that they will not compete. Right? This is something not good for the society. There are different ways in which they can do that. They set output quotas. Okay, you produce this much, I will produce this much. The total will be exactly equivalent to the market demand. So there is no wastage. There is no question of competition. There is no question of fighting over each other to sell their products. I know that I have a market share of X. I will sell X goods. My competitor will sell Y goods. So the total demand of the market is X plus Y. If it is not there with me, he will buy with my competitor. So that is what we are calling as a collusive oligopoly. So there could be some kind of output quotas. Both of them will agree that they will not decrease the price. They will fix the prices either with a formal agreement or with an internally created kind of an agreement. And they don't do heavy advertising, right? Probably if one of them is advertising, the other will take a back step. So they don't indulge in very heavy advertising among themselves. So the costs, they are reducing their advertising, marketing, promotional costs. They are increasing the price. They are not producing in excess. They know how much to produce because they are going to sell whatever they are going to produce, and they do not get into each other's markets. In a way, they are creating a monopoly for themselves. right? Though they are not explicit monopoly, virtually they are creating a monopoly scenario. That is what we call as collusive oligopoly, which is resulting in the overall industry's profits going up because prices will go up and the expenses are coming down. So the overall profits of the industry are going up. No wastage. So probably the industry's profits are going up, but the customer is the one who is going to suffer because of this kind of a practice. So there are so many restrictions with respect to collusive oligopoly. A lot of forms of this are banned in many countries as well, right? So that is one form of oligopoly that can exist. Especially this kind of oligopoly can exist when there are very few firms and they can interact with each other, they know with each other very well, they can talk to each other regularly, they can monitor the actions of each other very well. That is when this kind of oligopoly can quite heavily persist. But the traditional oligopoly, which is the non-collusive one, no agreement in any form between the players, which means they are fighting for each other's market share. They may produce in excess. They will not fix the price. They engage themselves into price wars. They enter into they do heavy advertising, heavy promotional activities. So they spend heavily on promotion and advertising, and they try to grab the market shares of the other the other competitor or the rival, which means the overall profits of the industry are going to go down because the pricing is going down, but the costs are going up for each individual firm. So in each individual firms, the profits are going down. The horizontal summation across the profits of each of the individual firms is working out to be the industry profits. Even that is going to go down. And in this kind of a market, because the entry barriers are much lower, right? The entry barriers generally, though we see that they are lower, they are not that lower compared to that of a monopolistic competition or a perfect monopoly, perfect horizontal, no, perfect competition. But they are slightly lower compared to that of a monopoly. And if the barriers are much lower, what is that I am trying to say is there is very little possibility for a collusion. Because if the barriers are much lower, tomorrow even if X and Y collude with each other, there could be a Z who can enter and who can eat away the business. So there is a competition that is going to prevail. But if I say, no, there is very difficult for Z to enter into the business at all. So only X and Y will be the only players in that business, at least for some decent period of time. Then there is a very high chance of collusive behavior between X and Y. But if they really start feeling that Z can enter and eat away all their business and overall reduce the profitability for both of them, then there is a very limited chance that they collude. They try to be competitive, and this is what will benefit the customer overall. So, understanding these different types of oligopoly is very much essential for us. Now, just trying to expand a few of these things so that we get much more clarity. When we talk about a collusive oligopoly, there are two major forms which we talk about: a cartel, which is more and more formal collusive agreement between the two parties. To a large extent, I see that it is banned in many countries. Whereas tacit, though it is not explicit, it is very much implicit. Though the companies don't talk to each other, don't create a formal agreement between each other, but they get into a joint strategy. Right? They observe the other firm's behavior. They do not directly indulge into any kind of competition with the rival. So generally, wherever you see this kind of collusive behavior, whether it is cartel or tacit, I should see a situation where the firms are very few in number. They can understand each other very well. They know each other's production mechanisms. They know each other's cost structure very well. More or less similar kind of products. And there, if there are barriers to entry which are very, very significant, and they are operating more and more in a stable market, and government is not taking any kind of measures to curb the collusion, or there is one single firm which is a dominant firm, because uh, generally tacit is very heavily seen in this kind of a scenario. If the dominant firm which is having the largest market share is increasing the price, it's very much possible that all others will virtually increase their price. So it's as good as they have got into a collusion with the dominant firm as well. So what we see is the collusion is very much possible in if all these things are present in the economy, and especially the role of the government. If the government is not having any kind of practices in place which can curb the collusion, the firms can very well collude with each other. So from that dimension, if I am trying to look at the cartel is a formal agreement. So in a formal agreement, it has to go in such a way that the two firms explicitly, clearly divide their scope of work, whether it is in terms of quantity, the price, the geography. They try to delineate in such a way that they produce what exactly they are going to sell, no wastage as a part of their selling process, not too much of cost that they are going to incur on promotional and advertisement activities. The pricing will be higher. They don't engage into price wars. So when I combine them, it should work like a monopoly. That is where the cartel is going to maximize the profit. So it should clearly create a kind of a feeling that the entire set of firms, they are acting together like a single firm, which means there is no difference between a firm and an industry there. In that case, we could see that each firm's profits are going to be maximized. So they are determined, they are completely dividing the market between themselves. They are fixing the price, and this is resulting in a dissatisfaction to the customer. It's not acting in the best interests of the customer, but individually, each firm is really gaining a very heavy profit. So they are setting production quotas, how much they should produce. They know how much they can sell based on their market share, and they are going to produce only that much. So there is no inventory building up. Lots of costs are reduced in this kind of a mechanism. So they come together, they try to explicitly create the barriers for entry. No new firm can enter into that business. They together, the size of them becomes much, much higher, that it becomes very difficult for any new firm to enter into that business again. So all these things will provide the profit, maximize the profits for the oligopolists. They are literally acting like a monopoly virtually. So generally in majority of the countries, this is illegal. But on the other side, the firms will get into this practice very heavily. Tacit, which is more like an implicit kind of a collusion agreement. No formal agreement between the firms. But what we generally observe, probably you could observe in the real world also, a dominant firm price leadership, which is more like a dominating firm. Let's say the leader. If the leader has followed a strategy X, you find that all the firms which are traditionally called as followers, they would also try to implement this X. So they try to choose the same price which is set by the leader. And the leader here is assuming that the constant market share is going to be maintained. His market share will not increase or market share will not decrease. No new players are going to come into the market. So as long as that assumption is fine, whatever the strategy that is followed by the dominant firm, it is very much possible that all the followers are going to follow the same. So what traditionally happens in this kind is, you look at it like this. The quantity, you look at the marginal costs and look out for the demand curve for the industry as well as for the leader. Now look at the marginal revenue curve also for the leader. So the where the marginal cost curve cuts the marginal revenue curve, that is the quantity which the leader would be producing. So the leader would set the price which is equivalent to whatever for this quantity, whatever I go for the demand curve, this is the price that would be set by the leader. Now what the industry will go with is whatever the price the leader has set, whatever the price the leader has set, that would be taken by the industry also. So for this price, this is the quantity the industry is willing to produce. So without looking out for the marginal cost curve for each of the firms, marginal cost with the marginal revenue for each of the firms, and all, the overall industry is trying to follow the leader in this case. And like that, we have various other forms of tacit collusion. One, we have a barometric firm, which is like, okay, all of the firms will see, okay, which firm is reflecting the market conditions extraordinarily, a changed market, and which has reflected the changing market conditions explicitly in its price. That will become the price leader. So the barometric firm, which is more like all of them will sit together, observe, or all of them are observing that this particular firm's practices are more and more a reflection of the current economic scenario. Now that firm will be chosen as a price leader, and whatever the activities, whatever the strategies that this particular price leader is following, all others virtually they are going to follow the suit. But of course, at different points in time, the leader could change depending on who has adapted very much apt to the market scenario. And in some cases, this kind could be very much possible through the average cost pricing mechanism, where the price is set just some percentage above that average cost. And in some cases, we can have a price benchmark. Some firm's price I am using as a benchmark to set my price. There could be a shadow pricing. Every firm will observe what is the price that is being charged by the other firms, and make sure that their pricing is more or less at the similar levels. So, which means these are all the forms of tacit collusion itself, though explicitly there is no written agreement. So, there is nothing that the government can really ban on this. So, to a large extent, we see in the oligopolistic markets where there is a possibility for every firm to monitor the profits of the other firm, to monitor the revenues and the expenses of the other firm, to monitor the efficiency of the other firm, they could very much get engaged into this shadow pricing and various other forms of tacit collusion. But the collusion is a very dangerous thing on the other side. Okay, whatever it is, explicit, implicit, there is a very high possibility that this relation can break down. Individual firms can very well cheat. If they have found a better opportunity where they can really create an extraordinary profit for themselves, they can break the agreement very heavily. Right? When there are only very few factors that are favoring the collusion, and there is a possibility that the individual firm can really be able to get away with it, means not too much of punishment related, penalty related practices are there if this is broken. And after that, once the price war is coming up, can this firm really sustain that price war? In those cases, we see that the individual firm can really cheat. There is a real incentive for the firm to cheat, but of course, the consequences are very dramatic. So there is a very much a possibility that the collusion breakdown can occur in case of oligopolistic markets. Then, now if I try to look at from the perspective of non-collusive, right, non-collusive oligopoly scenario, a few interesting things to understand the behavior of the competitor companies. We talk about a few models to understand the behavior. One, a very popular one, the Cournot model, which simply says, let's say X and Y, this is more applicable to the duopoly model. Let's say X and Y are two companies. X is taking a decision on the price and the quantity that it has to produce and sell. Whatever the decision that X is taking, it's purely based on the assumption that Y will set the price at P1 and Y will sell Q1 quantity. So there is some assumption regarding the rival, what the rival is going to produce and sell. Very much possible in case of duopoly. But this kind of assumption can very comfortably be made only when the rival has been producing more or less similar kind of quantities. The market share has been more or less stable for the rival and both the firms, and the growth rates are more or less similar for both the firms. So in that kind of a scenario, whatever the decision regarding the price and the quantity that is traditionally taken by a firm X will be under the assumption that Y is going to produce this much and sell this much at this particular quantity. That is what is being brought out as a part of Cournot model. Then what the Bertrand model simply talks about is whatever the price that a particular firm has set, it assumes that whatever the price that the firm has set, it is going to stick to it. So based on that, so let's say like this, X, Y, Z. I know Y has set some price. Z also set as some price. So X thinks that Y and Z, they will stick to that price for some time. And based on that, X is going to set probably a lower price. Now this is where the catch is. It thinks that Y and Z are going to stick to their price, and based on that, it's going to project slightly, let's say, a lower price. Now, this is where the problem comes up. Once the X has lowered the price, Y and Z may not stick to their price. They may react to it and they may still set a lower price, which means there is a possibility of a heavy price war that can come up. But the Bertrand model clearly says that whatever the firm is thinking in terms of setting up a price, it is making an assumption that the competitors, they are going to stick to the price whatever they have set, at least for a certain period of time. So this kind of an assumption can be made when I really start feeling that yeah, the firms do not keep changing the price quite often. If these firms are known that they don't change the price quite often, then that kind of an assumption in terms of understanding the rival behavior is much more appropriate. And the third important theory is a very interesting theory in a non-collusive oligopoly, which talks about a kinked demand theory. Now we see that the demand curve you see in case of oligopoly, the demand curve is not perfectly sloped downwards. We see it goes with this kind of a behavior. At the current price, let's say this is the current price. So we see that the oligopolistic curve will look more like this, which means if the, let's say this is the price, this is the quantity. Now if the price is increased, if an oligopoly firm has increased the price, there is a very good chance that the rivals will not follow. Which means if the price is increased, there is a heavy elasticity. The quantity will decrease quite drastically for this firm. Lot of people will move to the competition. So the elasticity is going to be much, much higher for a price increase. If a firm X has increased the price, this is a very interesting theory. If a firm X, which is a part of the oligopoly, has increased the price, the competition is not going to increase the price, which means all the customers of X, they are traditionally getting shifted to the competition, which means the quantity of the X is going down drastically. That is the reason we say the demand curve is elastic at the price which is above the current price, whereas the theory again says if X has decreased the price, there is a very heavy chance that the competition is going to follow the suit. So even all the other firms are going to cut the price. So because every firm has cut the price, there is no chance that a new customer will come from the other firms to X, because everyone has really cut the price within no time. And because of that, there is no loss of customers, but overall the customer is going to get benefited because he is charged much, much lesser price. So this kind of a model will overall create a stability in the price, because, and at the same time the loyalty of the customer also would be maintained. So just trying to look at the economics here. If I'm looking at the Bertrand model, as I've said already, each firm really assumes that its rival will hold the price constant. So in that way, okay, if Y and Z are holding the price constant, X is going to set a reduced price. Now, okay, now Y will assume that X and Z are going to stick to their price. So Y will result in a price which is lesser than that in some time. So there is a price war that is getting set, which means the supernormal profits are directly eaten away as a part of the competition. The industry profits are going to go much, much lesser. Whereas in case of Cournot model, which is a duopoly based model, if both of them are actually acting like a perfect monopoly, they can increase the industry profits. But if they are not working like a perfect monopoly, then obviously it is not, the profits for the industry are going to be much, much lesser. Think of it like this here. Okay, the demand curve, let's say for the industry, and the demand curve for a company A, for a firm A. Now you see, I am assuming, what did I say in Cournot model? There is an assumption that the competitor or the rival would be producing Q1 goods and selling at P1 price. So which means I know what quantity I am going to sell. That's the reason I am setting the industry demand and my firm's demand as parallel stuff. So the gap is what is the demand that is associated with my competitor. Okay. So this is the firm A's demand curve. So which means this is the marginal revenue curve. So traditionally the firm A will produce QA quantity and it will set a price PA. Now the same logic, if I'm going with whatever is the gap between the two demand curves, is the quantity which QB is going to sell. And look out, they don't increase they know what is the price that the competition is going to set, Everything is known and it is acting like a perfect monopoly. So the demand curve for A is coming purely based on the industry, and it's making a pure assumption that the firm B is going to produce exactly QB, and it firm A is setting its pricing purely on the profit maximizing output level itself. So the equilibrium profits could be much lesser, and this is what could result because of the competition between the firms. This is what could result very much in a Nash equilibrium, which may not be a perfect equilibrium based profit. There is a Nash equilibrium that is coming up. So which means one company cannot move to another level without in an isolated manner. We'll talk about the Nash equilibrium slightly later. So this is what a Cournot and Bertrand model is coming out to. And a Kinked demand theory is directly bringing out price stability because of this reason. As I have already said, it is more and more elastic above the current price. It is more and more inelastic. So that's where you see it is more horizontal. Demand curve is more flatter here and more steeper for the prices which are much lesser than that. So there is a price stability, means there is no firm can directly increase the price at its own wish, because even if one firm has increased the price, immediately there is a change in the customer base, so it is forced to decrease the price. So there is a lot of reluctance to reduce the price or even increase the price, because if they are reducing the price, overall the industry is losing. So they will not generally tinker with the price. So they will not move away from the profit maximizing price and the output, even if the costs are changing. So that's the reason the Kinked demand theory model really works very comfortably with the traditional oligopolistic market. So oligopoly compared to various other market structures is slightly more complicated to understand. There are various models that come as a part of it. So, spending a little bit of more time in trying to understand the concepts that drive it are very much essential for it. Even a game theory can very well be applied to various oligopolistic models, which we would see as a part of our next session.